my name is Sarah Lambie. I am completing my Module 5 presentation for the legal aspects of policing at IRSC. Today we're going to be talking about the SB 1070 legislation that passed in Arizona. So it passed in 2010 to a very controversial response. It was actually so controversial that it ended up going to the Supreme Court in 2012, where the Supreme Court withheld that it was illegal action to take. This response by the Supreme Court led to multiple other states creating similar legislation. Now, what does the SB 1070 legislation actually do? So it requires police officers, if they have a reasonable suspicion that somebody is not in the country legally, it requires them to ask for documentation, paperwork to prove that that individual is in the country legally. So the reasonable suspicion is based on whether an individual is nervous, whether they can speak proper English, whether they have an American driver's license, or if they have a foreign plate. Now, this can be very biased towards Mexican immigrants or like Guatemalan immigrants, Asian Americans, as they oftentimes do not speak English as well as an immigrant from, say, Canada would. So that was the issue with SB 1070. It was very biased towards immigrants of color. And this kind of rolls into the issue of racial profiling. Racial profiling is the act of a police officer suspecting an individual of an offense or a crime because of their race or ethnicity. So this can be as crazy as believing all Black people sell drugs, or believing that every Mexican person is in the country illegally. So while on paper, the law claimed that they could not target an individual based on race, the law was definitely biased where it was easier to target non-white immigrants. For example, a Canadian visiting the country will not have the issue of not speaking English. They are more likely to speak English. This would make them less nervous around the police officer, so they wouldn't have that level of suspicion with the police. Whereas somebody from Mexico whose first language is Spanish, they're going to have a little bit more of that tension. Ultimately, the state of Arizona was sued for the passing of SB 1070. Many activists came together and they sued the state. So the lawsuit began just after it was passed in 2010, and the lawsuit was resolved in 2016. So the results of the lawsuit was that the requirement for the questioning of their citizenship or legality of their being here was terminated. It was no longer required for police officers to ask if they are there legally. The state of Arizona was also required to pay $1.4 million in legal fees to the plaintiff. So Mark Brnovich is the Arizona Attorney General, and he actually took issue with SB 1070. He is quoted as saying, "Officers should not prolong a stop, detention, arrest solely for the purpose of verifying immigration status. Officers should not contact, stop, detain, or arrest an individual on race, color, or national origins." So he actually discouraged officers from following the provision of SB 1070, as he found that it was resulting in unconstitutional stops, unconstitutional searches and seizures of individuals in the state, which the state could be liable for and could face any more lawsuits. So he actually encouraged his officers to, rather than searching and asking about the legality of citizens themselves, to, if they had any sort of suspicion, turn that over to the federal agent of ICE so that they can investigate any sort of claims of illegal aliens within the country and within the state of Arizona. So this is the works cited, and that's kind of the end of the presentation. So overall, the SB 1070 has a very large liability issue for the state of Arizona, as it does open the door for the lawsuits for racial profiling or for unconstitutional search and seizure, prolonged detainment. It just really is a huge liability issue for the state of Arizona.